Alrighty, so we got a major tournament in the UK. This was a 200-person, 2-day event in Birmingham, and I'm going to do a full recap. We'll talk about the meta, we'll talk about the top 8 deck lists, we'll break it all down. It's going to be pretty exciting. This is one of the largest, if not largest, events to date, and definitely the largest since Set 3 launched. Before we get going, if you want some more content from me, do check out my Patreon. I update that quite regularly. And of course, if you don't mind, subscribe to the channel. It helps out a ton. All right. So what I'm going to do is load up the full Limitless report now. So right here, the link to this website will be in the description, but Limitless, which is the group that ran this tournament, or the software that ran the tournament, has some great data during these events. You can see here, if you go to the Metagame tab in the top right, you get to see all the leaders that were selected, how many people played them, their overall meta share, their records and win rates, and then even more, right? So see, Anakin here is actually the most represented deck. It did not do well at all, had less than a 50% win rate. Not a single one made the top 8. It kind of got beat up. We can kind of take a look at what happened here. So you click on Anakin, you see all the people that played it, all the records and stuff. You can even look at the matchup spread. So here, all the leaders it played against. Now, a lot of them, all right, it played one Dr. Afra. That's not that relevant. Played a lot of Mauls, actually, 9-3 against Maul, another leader that didn't perform that great. Of course, the mirror is always going to be even. But if you look here, against Jango, it was 11-14, not great. Had a losing rate against Yoda, had a losing rate 4-8 against Sabine, got absolutely demolished by Cad Bane to a 2-12 rate. And then if you click on cards, now we're not going to do this for every leader, but you can actually see like the cards in the deck and like to what rate they were played. So we can see here, I mean, unfortunately, I don't remember all these bases, but Crystal City, Sandari, Dagobah, those are all blue. So the majority of these decks were Anakin blue. There were a few other color combinations, but then you can kind of see like, okay, 2.5 Sabines per deck, right? It probably means that most of the decks just had 3 Sabine units in them, right? But yeah, so Anakin, an interesting, like very interesting for me to see Anakin show up as the #1 deck in terms of meta share. I don't expect that to continue. I think Anakin is fine, but it certainly is not something that I think should be topping this chart even remotely right now. Jango, on the other hand, is the deck that I think should be topping this chart. 11% of the meta. I'm going to talk about Jango later. There were a couple in the top 8. This, to me, is the deck to beat right now. We'll get into the Jango stuff a little later. It had a pretty good rate, 55%. Not crazy high. 2 conversions, though, both Dave and Mikolaj. Mikolaj, I believe is how you pronounce that, but I'm not 100% sure. Both made the top 8 with their decks. And like if you look at the matchups, right, it was favored, it beat Anakin a decent amount. It was actually positive into Bosk, although I think Bosk Blue, another deck that made the top 8, is one of the few decks that does fight really well into Jango. It had a losing rate into Sabine. Again, not something I'd expect. So I think there's something going on with Jango in my mind, is that it had a ton of success in the first few events, and now people are starting to pick it up. I expect these people will start getting better at this deck, because when you start, like Jango is not easy. It's not, like no deck is easy. Every deck requires you understand the matchups, but there's very particular lines from Jango into decks like Sabine and into like control decks or other mid-range decks. And once you get those down, Jango starts feeling very favored into almost everything right now, with the exception of a few matchups. And I don't think it should be at a 40% clip against Sabine, in my personal opinion. Cad Bane, it went 5-9 against Cad Bane. Another one I'm very surprised at. I actually play a lot of Cad Bane. I test it with the team into Jango. Cad Bane has, for me, incredibly difficult time beating a Jango that knows the matchup, knows how important a Lurking Tie is in that matchup and how it kind of bricks the entire Cad Bane experience. And they are usually able to protect a Lurking Tie through their tap abilities, through their pings and Tarkentown through their sheer space dominance that Cad Bane often feels like a very uphill battle. So a couple matchups here, Sabine and Cad, that I would not expect Jango to be at the negative win rate against in the future once people get a little more practiced here. What else? So Sabine, 60% win rate. Sabine's still a monster. Very surprised to only see 6% of the field as Sabine, right? So this was a very wide spread of decks. Other than Anakin and Jango, nothing crossed 6%, right? So this stuff early in a meta makes more sense as people are exploring more things. I do think some of these things like Jango and Sabine are going to start rising in popularity pretty soon. Cad Bane had the highest win rate in the tournament, kind of a coming out party for Cad Bane, but also at a 6% clip. One made the top 8. Like I said, I think Cad is a good deck. It does have a little bit of an issue in my mind into Jango. I think once the Jango kind of figures out this matchup, now Cad Bane's like a new deck, so a lot of people might not be practiced playing into Cad Bane. Cad Bane also kind of demolished Anakin, we saw, and I think in that case as well, people need to like figure out how to not play so hard into Tarkentown, and like once these mid-range hero decks also start not doing that, I don't think their win rate is going to be like 2-12 like Anakin was. But Cad Bane had a very successful tournament. Expect more people to pick that up. And then, yeah, you got a smattering of some other things. Yoda, Bosk. Bosk is a good deck. I like Bosk right now. I think, like I said, has a solid Jango matchup and doesn't automatically fold into like Sabine. Maybe a bit unfavored there, but like has game into a lot of things and also kind of eats up a lot of the mid-range decks because it just has so much more longevity. And then, yeah, like a few other stuff like Quinlan, just a little bit. Han did not do well or show up in much, right? 4.5%. Han Yellow, though, is still, in my mind, a very good deck. It's one of the few aggro decks that I think can go toe-to-toe sometimes with Jango on the back of Cunning and win those matchups. But yeah. Past that, you see just very little, like Rey, a little bit. Palpatine is worth a mention because 2 of them made the top 8 out of these 8 players. I think if you'd ask them, they'd still say the Sabine matchup is awful. So it's just a matter of whether or not you're okay with that. I'm not entirely sure how to talk about it in the context of Jango. I think it's not like as bad as it is into Sabine. But if you kind of look at... So Howard and Josh, both fantastic players. One played blue, one played yellow. But if you look a little bit at their matchups, like Howard here, like beat up on a ton of mid-range decks. Quinlan, Hondo, Yoda, Cad Bane, Han, which could be actually pretty difficult. And Anakin lost his one Sabine matchup and then beat a Han too. That was actually a very similar to Josh's experience. They both went 7-1 in the Swiss and both lost to a Sabine. So the Palp stuff really does kind of beat up on like all that mid-rangey area, but has some difficulty into hard aggro. And yeah, it's just the Palp experience. So yeah, we can definitely look at like some more stuff. Like Kira, very little like data, right? 6 people played it. The highest finish was 6-2, and then mostly not so great after that. Maul was actually played, like 7 people played Maul. That's a lot, right? Chancellor Palpatine, 6 people, but like I said, the spread here is very wide. Tons of new decks getting played. This will start to consolidate as people start to figure out what's best. In my mind, that is Jango, Sabine as like premier aggro, and I think Jango would be something I'd be really focused on if I was either to play as and start to figure out the lines into a lot of these decks, or to play into, because he is an absolute menace for any decks trying to play units. All right, so here's our top 8 bracket. In first place, we had Bosk Blue. Then second and third, 2 different Palpatines. We had a Jango Tarkentown at 4th, Sabine CL5, Jango Tarkentown 6th place, then a Cad Bane Tarkentown and Sabine Yellow. So Two Sabines, two Jangos. That's not too surprising, although Sabine Yellow definitely the less popular of the Sabines. Not surprised to see a boss get in here, also piloted by Pierre, who is Thork. So in case, I'm sure he'll have a report to share with you. I'll definitely go check that out. His channel is Thork's Hot Takes, and he'll probably talk about his run to the win here with Boss Blue. Two Palps is not something you see very often. I know both of these players are absolutely fantastic at this game. The third place Palp, Yellow, Joshua Freeman Birch. I believe last time I covered a UK event, he had won it with Boba Green, and now he's playing Palp Yellow. It's a lot of the time, it's the players what's carrying the archetype, and I imagine they had some very tight play to get these Palps up here. Yeah, and we're going to talk about all these decks now. So here is Pierre's deck, Thork, first place. He was the second seed going into this, and I really like this deck. Been playing it. Boss can hang with Jango because he doesn't care that much about Jango's exhaustibility, so that's very important for a control deck. It's what makes some of the more unit-based control decks really struggle into Jango. That exhaustibility is wild. We see here that he's playing 3 Perilous Position, and then 3 more making openings in the sideboard. Just, we're, especially post-board, not trying to lose to a Lurking TIE Phantom and getting cheesed out by that. But this deck can survive to Snoke even against a Lurking TIE Phantom. So unless that TIE Phantom is getting buffed by something like a TIE Advanced, this deck can really just stabilize off the back of Snoke. It offers a ton of healing with top target and the client. The deck often only needs 1 double bounty trigger from the boss to really pop off, either by drawing 4 or healing 12. We see 1 restock in the main deck. We'll talk about how if decks like this become more popular, you will start needing to dedicate more slots into mirrors. It's something we'll notice that because he played Palp Yellow and Palp Blue in the semis and in the finals. Both those matchups actually went to time. And I expect if one of these people was playing mirror hate, like Bounty Hunter Crew, extra restocks, hand disruption effects, that they might have had a better chance to win those matchups without going to time. So something to look out for, because once that starts happening, you start having to eat up deck space that is helping you into like the aggro. Bosk, I wouldn't say is great into Sabine, but definitely better than something like Palp. And we see 3 Force Chokes in the sideboard here. As someone who like wants to be a little more main decked for Sabine, I may consider Force Chokes in the main at the expense of some of the larger like mid-range killers that exist in this deck, like Big Palpatine, maybe a 3rd Avenger. There's also 3 Super Laser Blasts here, but I understand why they're in the sideboard. And yeah, I think this deck is fantastic. This was well built and clearly had a plan in mind. Merciless Contest, one of the best cards this deck could have gotten from this set. I believe, I'm just going to glance really quickly here, that it and Perilous Position are the only cards from set 3 in this deck. And we're going to see that be a pretty common trend among these decks. There is very little set 3 going around, and Perilous Position, in all honesty, although is a fantastic card, is just like a lateral upgrade from Make an Opening, and this deck is actually just playing both. So set 3 not making that much of a mark here, although we did get 2 Jangos, and Jango is of course a set 3 leader. But congrats to Pierre or Thork. Go check out his report, which, you know, I don't know when it's going to come, but I'm confident to say it will, although I can't promise that. I don't control it. All right. Next, second place was Howard Williams with his Palp Blue. Like I said, his only loss in Swiss was to a Sabine. But here it is, Palp in all the glory. Tons of removal, tons of big stuff. The only set 3 card, let's see, is Perilous Position, I believe, and in the sideboard, Clone actually, which is interesting. We have lots of ramp. I don't think this deck is built to beat Sabine. I think, you know, fine. I don't think you can really make Palp beat Sabine consistently, so you might not need to like invest all the world in it. Client's actually a pretty solid card against stuff like Jango because the shield makes it difficult for him to get exhausted, so you can usually get a bounty with him. Traitorous, an interesting include. I get it. A deck can be soft sometimes to things like Lurking Tie, so just being able to stall that out a little more. Palp in general is just a mid-range killer. 3 super laser blasts, clearly came in expecting like a heavy mid-range style meta, which I think was accurate. That's what we saw. Like Anakin was the most played deck. So yeah, this is the Palp experience. 3 Megan openings and 3 perilous positions. You see a lot of people are just like prepped for this Lurking Tie situation. I think and not just that, like the Make an Opening and Perilous kill a lot of units in the Jango deck. So pretty valuable stuff. 3 Devotions in the sideboard. You know, the card's fine. Big issue with like it is especially is like Poe coming down and like blowing up your upgrades. It's a big issue with Traitorous as well into like the Sabine matchup, but you got to do what you got to do, and like incidental healing can sometimes help bridge the gap. All right, here's our 3 seed, which also finished 3rd place. It's Joshua Freeman Birch. This is a 55 card deck. Not going to get into that. Last time it was 54, so he's going to 55 now, and it works for him, so who am I to judge it? Palp Yellow is also a cool deck. Like, this is getting to play things like P38, which, you know, with Palpatine's sacrifice is, like, doing 3 damage in 1 turn. So that's, like, a really cool new addition to this archetype. Change of Heart, of course, is, like, the hammer that the yellow deck can dish out with Palp's ability. This deck has Poggle as well, which is another set 3 cards. So we got P38, Poggle, and Droid Commando. So this is one of the heavier set 3 inclusions. We see the sideboard also has Cad Banes and Unmasking the Conspiracy. So definitely got some help from the set 3 for this deck. See a lot of so this deck is trying to play much more into the sacrifice theme of Palpatine with Confederate Courier, Poggle, even Cobb Vanth, P38. Like, all of these are good units to be sacrificing. He's trying to play a decent amount of Separatists, which makes the Droid Commando give you an ambush. The top end is still massive, right? 3 Walkers, 3 Devastators. It's just a lot of hammer. It's just getting there is the main thing, but like he's got the no good to me dads, the Waylays. Like, this is a stall deck that is not really that concerned always with like removing the opponent's threats. It's also just about delaying to the point where they can get a Palp out, potentially set up a big barrage. Palp Yellow is cool. Scanning Officer is another, like, I think Palp in general can have some difficulties with like a Han Yellow deck, and Scanning Officer is a nice card. Of course, it's an official, which helps with the Emperor's Royal Guard. It's interesting to see only 2 Emperor's Royal Guards, but there's also only 4 officials. Like, the deck, he's playing a lot of like spread cards, so 2 officers and like 2 couriers, 2 Poggles, 2 Cloud Riders. It's like, in a way it's inconsistent, but in a way it's just like trying to provide a lot of flexibility in like what it's going to be able to do. So Palp Yellow, not a deck I am very experienced with. I've played a lot more Palp Blue than I have Palp Yellow, but this is something cool to take a look at. All right, in 4th, Jango. So before I break down this deck, I just want to do a little bit of a Jango spiel. So the reason I think this deck is kind of crazy is because anything trying to interact with it with units is just always a step behind. The synergies that some of these units provide with Jango's ability, ISB Agent, P38, Ruthless Raider, is actually wild. These units coming down, exhausting things, and presenting threats at the same time. A few of them also die into exhaust triggers like the P38 and the Ruthless Raider. The ISB Agent being able to just like exhaust something and next turn attack and like exhaust a leader. It is actually wild that some of these cards can like exhaust 6 and 7 cost leaders without even spending resources. What happens here is, because this is an aggressive deck, it's pushing damage, you often need to react to what's in play. But the problem is, especially with things like P38 and Ruthless Raiders, if you defeat them, they then exhaust your biggest unit. So unless you are comfortable enough to first use your big units and take that damage from their P38s and Rootless Raiders, you have to always do your removal first. And because of that, they exhaust your unit and they prevent you from closing out the game. So decks like Kira or Cad Bane or any mid-rangey deck that needs to both interact with you and then push damage to actually end the game before you draw into your burst, like your pumps or your raiders for extra reach or your daring raids or like just spam out units, it can't do it because its units keep getting exhausted and it cannot push damage. And Jango gets to both deploy units, push damage, and block you from attacking him back. And it is a crazy powerful ability. Because it's this ability, he can also just race into other aggro decks like Sabine and Mono Yellow Han. Now, those decks can still beat Jango. They're some of the few unit-based decks that don't automatically kind of fold to this strategy because they are just fast enough to get under this sometimes. But a lot of decks can't. Then there's more. There's Lurking Typhon, which accidentally just gives you some free wins sometimes. It also forces decks to put a bunch of cards specifically to not lose to Lurking Typhon. And that's tough. And if your way to not lose to a Lurking Typhon is to have your own space units to attack the Lurking Typhon, that is also a problem because not only does this deck play a billion space units that can protect the Lurking Ty, it also gets to Tarkin Town, your first unit that might be a threat to Lurking Ty. And it also gets to exhaust your units before you get to attack them. So there is just a lot of free win equity off of the Lurking Ty, off of triple Dark Raid chains with Ruthless Raiders, and the fact that this is just an innately powerful core of cards that pushes damage, right? It's a very similar core of cards to the Boba Red deck, but that was like doing really well towards the end of the last set, but it races better because of Jango's ability, actually. Top it off, Jango himself being an uncapped on deploy is kind of wild, and he has 7 health. 7 health is a giant breakpoint for a leader, especially one that deploys on turn 4. It makes him almost always guaranteed damage and then guaranteed soak, right? Because you need to remove him and he can soak so much damage. He can soak basically an entire overwhelming barrage, which then lets the deck deploy more into the board. The uncapped nature of his ability makes him, with the Vamp Race Flamethrower, an absolute menace into unit-based ground combat. He can equip a gauntlet, and then if you don't immediately claim and one-shot him, he can exhaust your entire board while pushing damage into your base. And this, although is not always good into every matchup, is certainly good into how a lot of decks try to interact, because decks that try to go ground warfare and like restore, think like things like Rey sometimes, or even Anakin, they can't race it. So there's just so much going on with this deck. But the core here of like ISB, P38, and Ruthless Raider being kind of crazy cards without, well, not ISB, but P38 and Ruthless Raider, kind of crazy good cards even without Jango's ability, go to like unseen heights with it. And Jango, in my mind right now, is the deck to beat. And it didn't do amazing in this tournament. I mean, 2 top 8s, but like it wasn't that high represented, and it was only 55% win rate. But we saw earlier that this deck had negative win rates into Cad, Bane. I think that does not track for me in my internal testing. It had negative win rates into Sabine, also not really tracking for me. This deck is very good. You need a lot of very nuanced answers to even stand a chance into it. A lot of cards that might not even be good into a lot of other decks just in order to stand a chance here. So, Bosk Blue winning, you know, he didn't play a bunch of Jangos, but he was prepared for Jango, and that is a deck that does not require unit-based combat in order to control Jango's damage. And Jango can run out of steam and does have an issue dealing with Snoke sometimes. But like Snoke on his own is not enough if you haven't done enough damage mitigation throughout the game, which is something that like the softer control decks that play Snoke, maybe Kira or Krennic, even Palpatine, might not be able to do as well as something like Bosk, who is able to create burst heals and just has way more 1-for-1 removal for this deck than those typically do. All right, that's the Jango spiel, and now this is the Jango deck. New stuff here from like previously covered. Maybe Swoop Down wants a little more ability to like interact on the ground if he absolutely needs to. And of course, it does just give Saboteur, so it's like an extra breaking in. I really like Cad Bane as a mirror breaker, or even just into like any mid-rangey hero decks. I might even be so inclined to put some in the main deck, not even have them in the sideboard. I like the Tie Advanced because of like what you can pull off with Lurking Tie into Tie Advance is like a game over for a lot of decks. The Flamethrower, really like it into a lot of matchups. But this deck, yeah, it's fantastic. It's not playing a lot of 1-drops anymore, but just enough. It does not need to play into Tarkin Town decks. Like, it does not need to play a turn 1 card often. Like, I think that may be something decks like this are sometimes struggling, is that maybe they're into like Cad Bane decks. They were just playing out a unit that would get Tarkin Towned, and then they'd fall behind. They can just skip the first turn, play something like a 7th Fleet or a Lurking Tie on turn 2, and be in great shape. So congrats to Dave on the 4th place finish. He was the only 6-2 to make the top 8. All right, Alessandro here was the 1 seed. He was the only undefeated in Swiss, went 8-0, but he did finish 5th. He was Sabine ECL with 1 new addition from set 3, being Admiral Yularen. Yeah, Sabine's still great. Like, Sabine's awesome. I see Spec Forces here, which, you know, they're in and out of these Sabine decks, usually out at this point, but I get the inclusion. The Darksabers are not in the main deck anymore. I completely agree with that. Darksaber is not a real card when you're playing into Jango, and I think you need the Bright Hopes to make that matchup better. I do see that he put the Darksabers in the sideboard, which, you know, is decent. Like, into some matchups, you just bring them in and it can get you some free wins. Timely Intervention is something I would want in the main deck. I think it makes drawing redundant copies of Poe and Wrecker in the late game just be a win condition into somewhat unwinnable board states. And then, you know, U-Wing, I'm not personally on the U-Wing go late kind of like grind out plan that Sabine can do with it, but it's a fine include. Fighters for Freedom is often a main deck card. That's, I think, kind of what Yularen replaced. He's included them in the sideboard, I think, just to like have more early game stuff to do into some matchups. But the Sabine core here is what it is. It's essentially a set 2 deck. I don't even think you need to play Yularen, which would make it an entirely set 2 deck. So that point, take it for what it is. We've seen not so much set 3 so far. Here's the 6th place finish, Jango. This one was a little more hyper aggro focused. It had extra 1-drops into Death Star Stormtrooper, included a couple copies of Sneak Attack, which does some crazy stuff if you like triple Dark Raid into a Rootless Raider, into a Sneak Attack Ruthless Raider, just like pure pump damage. I think the Sneak Attack also made him want to include Palpatine in the sideboard, which is like a decent sneak target, being able to bring that down a turn earlier. That's usually like the Cad Bane slot at this point, which is my personal preference, but I understand why they put Palpatine here because of the sneak attacks. The Confederate Tri-Fighter is a set 3 card. This deck does have a few, of course, like P-38, the Executor tank. The leader himself is a set 3 guy, so still it's almost entirely a set 2 and set 1 core, but there is a little more set 3 here. My issue with that can't heal thing is that like the best heal card in the game is Vigilance, and Vigilance can still kill it and then heal 5, so I always find that a little awkward, but the card's fine. And yeah, this is still a shell that's gonna be incredibly powerful, and like there's still some innovation to be had here, but be prepared for Jango. All right, in 7th place, one of my favorites is Cad Bane. I like this deck, but I talked already a lot about how I find the Jango matchup not good at all. This deck actually only has 6 early space units in the 3 cartel spacers and the 3 punishing ones. So frankly, I don't know how it can ever beat a Lurking TIE Phantom. Like the first or two space units you have are very rarely ever going to be able to trade into a Lurking TIE. It is doing the now there are two of them, which I like. Like I made a deck guide about this deck. This is not my list, and he's made quite a lot of, like, he has a lot of cards that I was not playing, but that I actually may need to. Like the Guavian Antagonizer over Greedo. I get it when people are playing ping decks. I had Greedo. I probably should be cutting Greedo, whether or not it's for the 2/3 Saboteur unit or even like something like Kinton Intimidator, which is a 1/4. I think Greedo is probably a little liability, and I probably should move away from it in my own testing. Bamboozle here is another trick that you can find off of Jabba. Of course, you're basically tasked into using the discard effect on it, because otherwise the card itself costs 4. I like the Waylays, no good to me dead. Might want even more no good to me dead. It is a way that you can sometimes interact long enough with a Lurking TIE. Cad Bane is what you're trying to reach into, like, go wide or space decks, because they have troubles removing him. The deck main function is to try to get ahead early with things like Tarkin Town and just good rate Underworld units, and then just stay ahead, because once the deck is ahead, that Cad Bane ping becomes very, very powerful. And I like this build, although, like I said, I feel like I'm tasked, if I'm going to play Cad Bane, to include way more space and ways to interact in space, because I don't think the deck can race into a Jango, because we talked about how, well, you can gain control of the ground, but then if they're ahead on life, you kind of have to choose, all right, do I push damage myself or do I interact? But if I interact, a lot of their units, they're good units, exhaust my units on the ground. And if I interact, they can play like a Ruthless Raider from their hand and exhaust my Zuckuss, and then I can't attack for 6 that turn. So it's like this really weird dynamic having to deal with this Jango. Him, of course, coming out, he's very difficult to one-shot, although this deck does have things like Surprise Strike and Hot Shot Blaster to hopefully get him off the table real quick. But he comes out, and then you kind of have to kill him, and he soaks up a lot of damage. If you don't kill him, he's going to exhaust all your stuff too. It's a tough matchup. I think this deck can do quite well into Sabine, because they are the kind of deck to have no choice but to play into your Tarkin Town. So that's pretty solid. It does well into like hero mid-rangey decks that just kind of have to play into the board. We saw how well this deck did into Anakin. Now, like, it was like 12-2. I wouldn't expect Cad Bane to 12-2 Anakin all the time, but it is like the kind of matchup you want to be playing with Cad Bane. And of course, control can be sometimes pretty difficult, because the Cad Bane leader ability is not always fantastic there. But in the sideboard, we got Zero the Hutt, which I think is a cool card to play with. Now there are 2 of them, because you can get him out turn 2, and then he's very difficult to remove, and he can just start exhausting resources every turn. He doesn't provide much power or oomph, but it's a very annoying mechanic. All right, and in 8th place, the 7th seed, this was Sabine Yellow. This is a deck that has made a couple set 3 cards feature. It's got the R2-D2 as another low-cost unit, and then the Sabine Wren unit, which I really like, because that unit is a really safe play on turn 3. She can't get attacked, so you get to play her. They have to choose if they absolutely need initiative that turn. They have to claim to be able to kill her. And then in the sideboard, there's Clear the Field as well, which is another set 2 card. This is not like the Sabine Yellow list that I've like typically seen that are like much more space focused. This is like basically just a ground deck. It's playing like the good space units, A-Wing, Red 3, Millennium Falcon, and then that's it, right? You got Sneak Attack K2. It's a very powerful combo. Or like even Sneak Attack Fleet Lieutenant is just straight base burst if you need it to be. It can be 5 damage. Got Daring Raid, which I think is a card that's on the rise right now. 6 shielded units, crafties, and elites. I like that in Yellow Red Hero. It's some of the stuff that feels good to actually play into all these Tarkin Town decks, because they can't get removed on the first turn. They are resilient units. They can't even get tapped down by Jango. Yeah, so Sabine's cool. This is kind of like the off-brand Sabine, but he did really well. It's playing a lot of pumps, 3 Hot Shot Blasters, 3 Surprise Strikes, 3 Daring Raids, right? There's no 4 Cause of Believe in this deck, I don't believe. So I think there's just a little too much non-heroic stuff, but it's a cool build. and be cool to check it out. All right, that's my review. Congrats again to the finalists. It was a cool tournament to watch. Congrats to Thork or Pierre for winning it all with the Bossk Blue. If you want more updates from me, check out my Patreon and stay tuned, because next up, Ray Green deck guide. Get to play some Bright Hopes and Concord Dawns in the same deck to maybe stem off this Space Rush powerhouse of a deck in Jango. And until next time, take care.